When a terrified young maid named Lila, running from a deadly secret, falls into the icy sea, her life seems over until she's rescued by Captain Dorian Blake, a billionaire special forces soldier. But saving her life was just the beginning. As danger resurfaces and buried truths come to light, a bond forged in silence becomes an unbreakable love, neither of them expected. The sky was gray that morning, and the wind carried the salty scent of the sea as it crashed against the rocks below. Lila's footsteps were quiet on the worn wooden dock, her shoes soaked through from walking all night. She had no family, no money, and nowhere left to go. Her employers, who had taken her in under the promise of shelter and work, had treated her like dirt. She cooked, cleaned, and served without rest, often without food herself. Last night, when one of them tried to lock her in the cellar again, she ran, through back streets, over hills, down to the edge of Greyport, where the world met the ocean. She wasn't thinking of anything anymore, just the crashing waves and the cold wind biting at her face. One step too close to the edge, and the world tilted. Her foot slipped on a slick patch of green moss. She didn't even scream. Her body hit the freezing water like a stone, and the current dragged her instantly. The sea didn't care how broken or tired she was. It had no mercy, no voice. Lila fought to keep her head above water, but her limbs were weak from exhaustion and hunger. Her coat grew heavy, pulling her deeper each second. She gasped for air, coughed salt, and the world started to blur. Miles away, a sleek black speedboat was cutting through the early waves. On board was Captain Dorian Blake. He had the look of a man used to storms, broad shoulders, scarred hands, eyes like ice that had seen war. After retiring from the Special Forces, he had built a vast shipping empire and bought the cliffside mansion in Greyport to escape the noise of the world. But that morning, as he looked through his binoculars toward the docks, something caught his eye. A splash. A figure in the water. Instinct took over. He turned the boat with expert precision and gunned the engine. Within minutes he was closing in. Lila's head bobbed once, then vanished beneath the surface. He dove without hesitation. The water was sharp and cold, but he reached her in seconds. Her body was limp, barely conscious. Wrapping his arms around her, he swam back with powerful strokes. The engine roared as he sped back to shore, where his private dock met the rocky cliff. His staff rushed to help as he carried the girl inside, soaking wet and unconscious. She was small, fragile, barely alive. The mansion's doctor was called immediately. Blankets were wrapped around her, and a fire lit in the great hall. Dorian stood watching, his mind racing. Who was she? Where had she come from? No ID, no phone, nothing in her coat but a small silver key sewn into the lining. She didn't wake for hours, but when she did, her eyes wide, dark, and terrified, met his for only a moment before closing again. She didn't speak, not a word, and Dorian, for reasons even he didn't understand, felt a strange responsibility take root in his heart. Something had brought her to his sea, and something told him this was just the beginning. The next morning, the air inside the mansion was still and quiet. Lila awoke slowly, the softness of the bed unfamiliar beneath her. The golden light from the tall windows filtered in through sheer curtains, warming her face. She blinked at the chandelier above her, confused, unsure if this was real or just a dream brought on by exhaustion. Every inch of her body ached, her lips were cracked, her limbs stiff, but she was alive. For a moment, panic surged through her. She sat up quickly, eyes darting around the spacious guest room. It was unlike anything she'd ever seen. Polished floors, velvet drapes, and furniture that looked too expensive to touch. She swung her legs off the bed, expecting someone to come in shouting at her, but no one came. Her coat was gone, replaced by clean, folded clothes on a nearby chair. A tray with warm soup and bread sat on the nightstand. She didn't know where she was, or why she had been saved, but her instinct was clear: stay quiet, stay invisible, survive. Later that day, a woman came in and spoke gently, telling her she was safe, and that the man who saved her was Captain Dorian Blake, the owner of the estate. Lila gave only her first name and offered no details. She didn't trust anyone. The staff, although polite, looked at her with a mix of curiosity and suspicion. She asked to work in exchange for shelter, unwilling to take charity. Dorian agreed, assigning her simple housekeeping tasks, but warned his staff to treat her with care. He didn't understand why he felt so protective of her, but something about her silence unsettled him. He had seen fear before in war zones and interrogation rooms. Hers was different. It was deeper, buried beneath layers of pain. As days turned into weeks, Lila began her tasks quietly, sweeping, polishing, dusting corners no one cared about. She moved like a shadow, never speaking unless spoken to, never making eye contact. At night, when the estate fell into silence, she would disappear into the gardens or along the cliffs behind the mansion, walking barefoot under the moonlight. One night, she stood still near the shed for almost an hour. The next morning, one of the gardeners noticed disturbed soil behind it, like something had been buried and dug up again. Suspicion grew quietly among the staff. They whispered that she was hiding something. One of the guards suggested checking security footage, and Dorian agreed. What they saw was strange. Lila had gone into the garden holding a small pouch. She had dug a hole and carefully placed something inside before covering it up. But when the gardener checked the spot the next day, it was empty. Only loose soil remained. Dorian didn't question her directly. Instead, he began to observe. He noticed her jump at the sound of closing doors, how she flinched when someone approached from behind. She never smiled. Her hands were always clenched, even in sleep. Whatever past she had run from hadn't let go of her yet. Something was buried deeper than just the soil, and Dorian knew he had just scratched the surface. The weather in Greyport turned colder, and with each passing day, the mystery surrounding Lila deepened. She continued working around the estate with quiet precision, avoiding unnecessary interaction. The staff kept their distance, unsure of her presence. Dorian, however, had started paying closer attention. His instincts, sharpened from years in military intelligence, told him something was wrong. There was a tension in Lila's movements, a constant alertness in her posture, as if she was expecting danger to appear at any moment. She never used a phone, never wrote anything down, and kept her few belongings in a small locked drawer. One night, Dorian sat in his study reviewing the surveillance footage again. The same scene played back, Layla burying the pouch, her expression unreadable. The next morning he had his head of security check the entire grounds. That's when they found it. Behind the shed, hidden under the soil, was a torn photograph folded into a tight square. It showed a younger Lila, perhaps 10 or 11 years old, with a woman whose face had been scratched out. The photo was wrapped in a ribbon stained with something dark, dried blood. Dorian stared at it for a long time, the image unsettling and silent. He made a decision. He reached out to an old contact from his time in Special Forces, now a senior analyst in a classified government database program. Using discreet channels, he sent the photo and a still image from Lila's face, captured from security footage. Hours later, he received a response that made his breath catch. The file was restricted, locked under the highest level of federal security. When access was finally granted through emergency clearance, the contents of the file revealed a chilling truth. Years ago, Lila had been placed in the National Protected Witness Program under a different name. She had been the key witness in a high-profile case involving a secret criminal network that operated under the cover of a charitable orphanage. Children had been trafficked, abused, and used for illegal activities by people in powerful positions. Lila, at the age of 12, had escaped and exposed the entire ring. Her testimony had led to dozens of arrests. In exchange for her safety, she was relocated, given a new identity, and disappeared from the public eye. But now, someone had found her. Dorian's security team was put on full alert. That same night, a silent alarm was triggered on the northern side of the mansion. Motion detectors picked up 2 unidentified figures on the property. The men were armed and wearing masks. Dorian and his team intercepted them before they reached the house. A struggle followed, but both intruders were captured. One carried a copy of the same photo Lila had buried. In his pocket was a piece of paper with Dorian's estate address and a name, Lila. Interrogation revealed they had been hired by an anonymous source known only by a codename, Hawkshade. It was a name Dorian hadn't heard in years, one tied to the same network Lila had exposed. Hawkshade was believed to be dead, eliminated during the original raid. But now, it seemed he was not only alive, but had come back to silence the one person who had brought his empire down. Dorian realized then that Lila hadn't just run away, she had been running for her life. The mood inside the estate shifted overnight. Security doubled, every entry point was reinforced, and motion sensors were upgraded. Dorian's mansion, once a peaceful retreat, now resembled a fortress. Lila sensed the change but said nothing. She noticed the guards posted at every hallway corner, the new locks on every window, the subtle way Dorian's staff began monitoring her movements more closely. She knew her past had caught up. The illusion of safety had ended. But what she didn't know was that Dorian had already devised a plan, one that involved risking everything to ensure her freedom. He called in a favor from the federal agency, overseeing the Witness Protection Program. After reviewing the new threat, they offered to relocate Lila, again, to erase her identity once more. But Dorian refused. He had seen firsthand what fear had done to her. Constant hiding had taken her voice, her smile, and her peace. She deserved more than running. She deserved closure. That's when Dorian proposed an alternative. The plan was bold. First, Dorian leaked false information into the dark web, suggesting that Lila had died in a second drowning incident. The local news carried the story, young woman found dead in sea near Greyport. A body was recovered and cremated, though it belonged to no one. It was all staged. Lila remained hidden deep beneath the estate in a panic room few even knew existed, equipped with food, water, and live surveillance. The rest of the estate was cleared except for a few of Dorian's most trusted men. To lure the hunters, Dorian released more bait. He opened access to a secured server, supposedly containing the only surviving copy of Lila's original testimony and photographs. It was an invitation, a final taunt meant to draw out whoever was left. The trap was set. 3 nights later, just past midnight, motion alarms triggered again. 3 masked intruders bypassed the main gate using devices meant for military operations. But they weren't prepared for what waited inside. As they entered the mansion, the entire perimeter locked down automatically. Hidden steel shutters dropped over doors and windows, gas vents released a sedative mist, and within minutes, 2 of the 3 were unconscious. The third, however, made it deeper into the estate. Dorian confronted him alone in the great hall. It was a brutal, fast exchange. The intruder was well trained, moving with precision and speed. But Dorian had not forgotten his training either. The fight ended when Dorian subdued him with a stun gun. Under questioning, the man revealed that Hawkshade, once presumed dead, was still in hiding, operating under a false identity, rebuilding his lost network. With that confession recorded and new evidence in hand, Dorian forwarded everything to federal authorities. Raids began across the country. Safe houses were dismantled. And at last, the monster Lila had feared for years was caught trying to escape through a private airfield. When the operation ended, Dorian returned to the panic room and opened the door. Lila stepped out slowly, unsure of what to expect. But the look in his eyes said it all. The threat was over. She was safe. Not because she had run, but because she had someone who chose to stand and fight for her when the world turned away. Sunlight filtered through the glass walls of the estate as calm finally returned to Greyport. For the first time in weeks, there were no guards outside Lila's room, no hushed conversations in the hallways, and no encrypted calls coming in at midnight. The storm had passed, but its traces lingered in the silence that followed. Lila walked through the mansion slowly, touching the polished banisters and windowsills as if seeing them for the first time. The fear that had wrapped itself around her heart for years began to loosen. For the first time since childhood, she could breathe without listening for footsteps behind her. Authorities confirmed the capture of Hawkshade, whose real identity had been hidden under a web of false documents and corrupt alliances. The network he tried to rebuild had been dismantled before it could rise again. Lila's name was cleared from all threat lists. Her witness file was officially closed, and the government offered her a new identity, along with a chance to start a life somewhere far away, completely off the grid. But she didn't want to run anymore. She stood in the vast garden of the estate, the same place where she once buried a memory and nearly her hope. Now it was different. The wind felt softer, the colors brighter. Dorian found her there one morning, standing still under the blooming trees. Without words, he knew her answer. She would stay. The mansion became more than a place of rescue. It became her home. She no longer wore the plain clothes of a maid, no longer walked with her eyes lowered. She spent her days learning how to live again, reading in the sunroom, tending to the roses, helping Dorian organize his charitable foundation that supported survivors of trafficking and abuse. Her story, once buried in fear, became the light guiding others to safety. Dorian, a man hardened by war and solitude, had found something unexpected in her presence. He had built empires, commanded troops, and stared death in the face. But nothing had prepared him for the quiet strength of the girl he had pulled from the sea. What started as protection slowly became connection. He didn't rush it. Neither did she. Their bond grew in the silences, in shared tea by the fire, and in the soft trust built over time. Months later, on a peaceful spring evening, they stood on the same dock where her story had begun. The waves were calm now, and the sky painted in pink and gold. Lila stared out into the water, no longer haunted by its depths. Dorian stood beside her, hands resting gently at his sides. There were no dramatic confessions, no promises spoken. There didn't need to be. Their story had started with a fall, born from fear and silence, but it had grown into something rare, love rooted in protection, loyalty, and healing. She had once been the little maid with no future. Now she was the heart of the home, and the man who had saved her from drowning had in truth saved her from disappearing. Together, they turned pain into purpose and loneliness into love.